Hey everyone, I've got something new for you today. By popular request, I've decided to do a computer build tutorial. Now this is for beginners. It's just a basic guide to building a system, an entry-level or mid-range system, certainly no water cooling. So first of all, I'm going to go through the parts that I'm using in the build. Then I'm going to show you how we install the parts and then the finished product. I won't be doing any testing on this system today. It is actually a client build though. So yeah, for this client build I'm doing a tutorial instead of the normal client build video. Those of you who know Matt from my gaming videos, he'll be helping me out with this build today, and he's actually going to be doing the build. I'm just going to be doing a little bit of it, but mostly doing the filming. I've actually got some new lighting today, so the lighting is going to be a lot better in my videos from now on, hopefully. But today I do have a cold, so you are going to have to put up with my hoarse voice. Anyway, the parts that I'm using. The motherboard that I'm using is the Gigabyte P67A UD3P V3. The graphics card, an EVGA GTX 460. The CPU, a Core i5 2500. The power supply, a Cooler Master GX 750 watt. The hard drive, a Western Digital Caviar Black 500 gig. The memory, 8 gig of Corsair Vengeance, low profile in black. So this is DDR3 and it runs at 1600 megahertz, 99924, 1.5 volts. And I'm just using a light-on optical drive, and the case that I'm using is the Fractal R3. It's hiding behind all the hardware. So now we're going to start the build, and I'll just give you another quick look, a closer look at each of the components as I'm building the system. Just a warning before you start the build, you have to be careful of static build-up in your body and make sure that you're grounded before you touch any component with a PCB, because static from your body can destroy hardware. So make sure you ground yourself. The other thing is, I take no responsibility for any damaged components. If you're using this tutorial to do a build, due care needs to be taken. Okay, so I'm going to do things in a bit more of a relaxed style to what I normally do. Usually I do everything in a specific order, but I'm just going to have to show each component as it goes into the build. And the first component that needs to go into the case is the motherboard. Now I've actually done a review on this motherboard, so I won't talk about this at all. I'll put a link on the screen and you can check that review out for all the details on this board. So first things first, you need to make sure the standoffs are in the case. You'll find the standoffs, they come with the case in a little box or bag, and they'll be probably mixed with a whole bunch of other screws. That's what a standoff looks like. It might be black or it might be gold or silver like this one. And these just screw into these little holes. Okay, so you can see a lot of holes in the case. Now the question is, which holes do you need to put the standoffs into? Well, the easiest way to do this, you need to know the size of your motherboard, but knowing ATX and EATX and MATX, that's not exactly a beginner's thing. So what I would do is place the motherboard into position and see which holes line up. Okay, and the way you do that, you need to first install the back I/O panel. This comes with the motherboard, it's in the motherboard box, and it goes into position just here, and it's actually quite hard to push them into position. You have to apply a lot of pressure to get them in. Okay, so I'll show you how to put that in now. Actually, I'll just get Matt to do it. Do you want to push that into position, Matt? So that's the way it goes, and I know that because I've actually looked at the motherboard the right way up, and I've seen the back I/O panel, and I've seen where the holes need to be. So Matt's clipped it into position now. That's the way it goes. So now what you do is put the motherboard into position, you know, push all the back I/O panel into there where it needs to be, see which holes are lined up, pull the motherboard back out and put the standoffs in those holes. So you can see there's already some standoffs in this case, and a lot of cases come with standoffs already in position, usually for ATX. So some of them might already be there, and you might only need to put a couple in, or maybe none if you're lucky. Okay, so that's the standoff step. Okay, so we found the box of screws and bits and pieces for this particular case. So just going through it now, looks like we've found the rest of the standoffs. Now for this motherboard, it's ATX, so you can see that there's those ones already in position, and all we need to do is install extra standoffs out here, so we're going to do that now. Then we're going to put the motherboard into position. Okay, I've got the light up here now so that we can see exactly what we're doing. That is a very bright light. It's great to have some decent props now. So now I'm going to show Matt installing the motherboard. You can see we've got those standoffs in, so go for it, Matt. It's a little bit tricky. What you've got to do is, you know, basically, you know, put one end down first sometimes, because sometimes there's not a lot of room in the case. Like, what I mean is, you might have hard drive bays that face the other direction here. Like, instead of facing that way, they face back that way. And that means sometimes you've got to get the motherboard around them or underneath them, and you've just got to angle it so that you can get it in there without doing any damage to it. You've got to be very gentle with it. Okay, so Matt's now tightening all the screws on the motherboard. Once you've got all the screws installed and tightened, everything's in position, you can then install the memory and the CPU. But first of all, when you're tightening the screws, they don't need to be extremely tight, and also make sure you don't use the screws with serrations on them. Some people might tell you to use these, but I say absolutely, definitely do not use these screws, because they chew the hell out of the motherboard. Make sure you use screws with flat underneath, not those serrations. That way you won't damage the motherboard. Yes, and they don't need to be very tight. Another thing that you need to be careful of is that the motherboard is in position properly in the back I/O panel. So all the ports need to line up properly, and there's these little tabs on the inside of the back I/O panel. You need to make sure that none of those are sticking into the ports. So always have a look before you tighten the screws, or otherwise you might get stuck with something like that, and then you have to undo all the screws to fix it. So motherboard is in position now, all the screws are tightened. We're now going to install the memory and the CPU. Just a close look at the memory that we're using. You can see the specs just there. And a close look at the graphics card. So this is an older graphics card, as some of you would know. But yeah, it was a good bang for your buck card back when it came out. Decent performance, and it runs cool and quiet as well. So Matt, grab a stick of memory, and I'll just show you how you put this into position. So what you need to do is loosen both sides of the slot, because there's these little tabs, hang on, just on either side, so you can see those tabs there. Some motherboards only have them on one side, Asus motherboards most of the time. So what you need to do, it depends how many channels of memory you got. Some motherboards will be single channel, dual channel, triple channel, and now we've even got quad channel. So they're often color coded, the positions that you need to install them in, but basically I'll just show you, because these ones aren't color coded, which makes it a little bit more difficult, because yeah, it's not often that they're not color coded. So I would be installing memory into the first slot and the third slot. That's if you've got 2 sticks. If you've got 4 sticks, you obviously just fill the whole thing. But you can either go first slot, third slot, or second slot, fourth slot. Okay, so that's the way you need to install the memory. So go ahead, Matt, and push that stick of memory in. So you can see, line it up. Once you've got it lined up perfectly, you need to push one side in and then the other side. And they both need to click into position. So there we go. That's one stick of memory installed. Make sure you push down firmly until you hear that click on both sides. So there we go. Yeah, and then make sure the latches are tightened properly against the memory as they hold it into position. Okay, now for the CPU. Now, all motherboards will come with a socket cover. Well, I haven't seen one that hasn't come with a socket cover. So you need to remove that first. And, you know, depending on whether it's AMD, Intel, or what socket version it is, you'll have all different socket designs. This is socket 1155. This is a P67 motherboard. And this is the design we're dealing with today. I can't go over any other designs. I just have to show you the one we have here at hand. So, you know, this tutorial, there's going to be some little blank spots because we just don't have the hardware to cover exactly what to do, but it's pretty straightforward how to deal with this socket, and there will be a manual with your motherboard that has instructions on how to deal with the socket, so you can always consult the manual if need be. Today we have this lever here, and it's hooked underneath the socket just here. We just need to undo that, push the lever back. We can then lift that up, push that back, and remove the cover. We do that by pulling on this end, and it just pulls out quite easily. Okay, now you can see the socket. This is extremely delicate. If anything falls into this socket, you'll have problems. Even, you know, down to a piece of hair. You need to be really careful that nothing gets into it. You also need to not touch it because the oils on your hands can cause problems with conductivity. So basically stay right away from it and install the CPU into it. Now this is difficult. You need to make sure that a dot or an arrow on the CPU, you can see the dot up in this corner here, is lined up with this arrow here on the socket bracket. Okay, so you can see it needs to go in that bottom left corner. Okay, so Matt, you can install the CPU now. You need to make sure that you don't rotate or drag the bottom of the CPU on the motherboard pins, otherwise you'll damage them. So the CPU is now in place, and we can now drop the bracket onto it. That needs to stay up there until the bracket here. Actually, I'll let you do it, Matt, because I can't see much through this screen. So you can see that the bracket was underneath that bolt just there, and then the lever can be latched underneath the socket bracket. So there we go. CPU is installed. We now need to put some thermal interface material, thermal paste, onto the CPU, and then the CPU cooler can be installed. You actually only need to install thermal interface material onto the CPU if you're using a third-party CPU cooler. In this case, we're using the stock Intel CPU cooler, which already comes with thermal paste. So we're going to use that thermal paste. Okay, so I'm going to let Matt install the stock CPU cooler now. I'm not going to talk about third-party CPU coolers because they're different every time. But basically this just has push pins, 4 of them, and you need to push them diagonally to each other. That's the best way. But one at a time. Actually, what you do, you saw how Matt did it then. That was good enough. There's obviously, you know, everyone's going to have a different way of doing something, but I need to give you a way that's going to work for everyone. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to do here now. You need to push one down at a time, but you need to be holding the other side so that the whole thing doesn't tip over, okay? So basically hold this side, push that side in, you can then push that, hold this side down, push this side in, then you can push that side in, and then you can do the same the other way, just so that the whole thing doesn't tip over when you put like major pressure on one side. Okay, so once that's installed, you need to plug it in. So I'll let Matt plug it in. There'll always be a 3-pin or a 4-pin fan connector close to the CPU. Once you've plugged it in, you need to make sure all the wires are out of the way of the fan. Otherwise you can have serious problems, because the fan, if it rubs enough time on those wires, it can cut through them completely and then cut the power to the fan. So I'm just going to fix those wires now, and I'll be back to show you them in a second. Okay, so you can see that I've moved this wire out of the way, but I really don't like the stock CPU cooler on any CPU. There's two things I don't like about, there's a whole bunch of things I don't like about this, but the main things are the push pins are dodgy, and the wire hangs into the fan. So you just need to get this out of the way as much as you can. And if you don't like it, I recommend getting a third-party CPU cooler. What needs to be done now is the push pins need to be rotated. Well, the top of them need to be rotated anyway. So I'm just going to get Matt to do that. That locks them into position so that you can't pull them back out again. If you're going to pull them back out again, you'll need to rotate them back the other way again. You can then pop them back out again. So just make sure all 4 are rotated. I think it's 90 degrees, is it?
Yep.
You'll feel them stop when they're in position. Okay, everyone's going to have a different idea about the order in which things need to be installed. And no doubt I'm going to get trolls coming along saying, oh, you should have done this first, or you should have done that first. But yeah, this is the way I do it. So if you've got your own idea, that's fine. I don't mind, other people with different ways. But yeah. This is the way I do it. So next is the power supply, and the reason I do the power supply now is so that there's not all cables hanging in the way when you're trying to install the motherboard, and you've also got more room to install the motherboard. Anyway, enough justification. I'm just going to give you a quick look at the power supply that we're using. So it's the Cooler Master GX 750 watt. Yeah, just rotate it around a bit. Alright, and just, oh yeah, the other side's the same. Just a look at the specs actually, I'll give you a look at those specs. So, as you can see, the power supply is not modular, which makes things a bit more difficult, because a modular power supply means it has plugs on the back here. And that means that you can plug in the cables that you are going to use and not plug in the ones that you don't need. A non-modular power supply means you've got all the cables plugged in. Even if you don't need them, you've still got them, and you've got to deal with them. You've got to hook them back somewhere and tie them back out of the way. So a modular power supply is definitely preferred, and it will make it a lot easier for a beginner PC builder. I highly recommend that you get a modular power supply, not one like this. So Matt is going to now install the power supply. This power supply will be a good example of how to do cable management though, because it's the most difficult type of power supply to manage the cables for, because you've got to deal with all those cables instead of having the modularity. Now you can see it's in position. There's 4 holes on the back, and you need to put 4 screws in and tighten those screws. So I'm just going to get Matt to do that now. Okay, so Matt's just doing up all the screws. I'll show you once he's finished tightening them all, so you know where they go, but they'll be different depending which way up you install the power supply. Now, most cases will come with a ventilated area. It depends also which part of the case the power supply is going to go in, whether it's a top mounted power supply or a bottom mounted. But I can't cover all of those variations because we'll be here all day. I just have to deal with what we've got here now. You can actually install this power supply either way. I think there's mounting holes for both ways, so you can have the fan facing upwards, sucking the hot air out of the case and pushing it out the back, because that's what that fan on the bottom of the power supply does. It sucks air through the power supply to cool it. So you can actually use it to suck hot air out of the case. But you've got to take into consideration that that fan will be sucking warmer air out of the case, so therefore it won't be cooling the power supply as well. So potentially the power supply might not last as long. So in my opinion, you're better off installing the power supply with the fan facing down to where there's always ventilation, or in most cases there's ventilation on the case, and even a dust filter in this case. And that stops dust from going through the power supply, which makes it last even longer. So cold air, no dust, definitely a good situation to have. That's the best way to install the power supply if you can. Make sure that you put all the screws in. You don't tighten any of the screws until you've got all 4 of them in, because often you have these open-ended holes where you need to install the screws, and you need to make sure that they all line up properly before you tighten them. Otherwise you can't get the other screws in. So I'm going to get the rest of these screws in now, and I'll give you another look. Okay, so all the screws have been tightened, and I'm just showing you so that you can see where they are. It would have been better if we had to use black screws so they match, but anyway, that's alright. Now for the hard drive, that is the next thing that I would install in a system like this. Now all cases have different mounting systems for hard drives, and this is another one of those areas that I can't help you for all the different cases. So I'm just going to have to show you what we've got here today, and hopefully you end up with something similar to this, or you can figure it out, because it's all fairly similar anyway. Anyway, so what we have here is cross-mounted hard drives, removable hard drive trays. So sometimes they'll be mounted facing that way, in which case you've got to pull them out from the back or from the front. But yeah, the general idea is the same. So I'm going to install a hard drive in this tray. How many do we have? Yeah, we've got 8. All of these can take 2.5 inch or 3.5 inch drives. Actually, I've got a review on this case as well, so I'll put a link to that up on the screen. So yeah, that way you can learn all about this case, because it's a pretty nice case. It's got some interesting features, one of my favorites. So anyway, I've got this hard drive tray out now, and the hard drive mounts to the bottom of the tray, and it's got these anti-vibration grommets here to stop any vibration from the hard drive being transferred into the case and causing noises. So you've got to make sure that you face the hard drive in the correct direction, so towards the back, because that's where the cables are going to be plugged in. You don't want them being plugged in at the front, because that'll look ugly. Hard drive is mounted on the tray, so you can install that now, Matt. Make sure it's the right way up, slide it into position, and it actually clicks into position, and it definitely doesn't move anywhere after that. So installing the graphics card can be done around the time of installing the hard drive, whether it's before or after. Installing the optical drive, the hard drive, and the graphics card can be done in any order. So first of all, you need to remove the expansion slot covers, and in this case we've got a dual slot graphics card, and these are the expansion slots I need to remove. So you might have some kind of toolless mechanism for your expansion slots, but in this case it's just a matter of removing these thumb screws. So Matt's got the graphics card over here, and he's going to install it for me. So we're installing it into the top PCI Express slot on the motherboard. The top slots always get all the bandwidth. Okay, so for example, on this motherboard, the top slot is times 16, and the second slot, because there's 2 PCI Express slots in this motherboard, so the second slot is only times 8. So you want to be installing it into the top slot for maximum bandwidth. Okay, the optical drive needs to be pushed in through the front of the case. First of all, you need to remove the slot covers. Now this is always different. Sometimes you remove them from the inside of the case and it's really difficult, and there's these clips that you have to undo and things. I won't go into any of that. In this case, it's beautiful. It's just a matter of undoing that, pulling that out, bam, that's it. That's another reason why I love this case. So then you just slide the optical drive in from the front, and then you've got 2 screws on either side to tighten up. So that's all it is. It will be, you know, slightly different every time. It's another one of those grey areas. So now what we're doing is pushing all the cables from the power supply into the back part of the case, because this is where the cable management happens. Cable management is basically hiding as many cables as you can to get them out of the way so that you can't see them from the front part of the build. Okay? So the whole idea of it is to make this side of the build look beautiful. The other side doesn't really matter so much. Well, certainly not for a beginner anyway. One day you might be making masterpieces with beautiful cables on either side. If you want to see something like that, go look at $1 Million PC. Just search $1 Million PCs and yeah, you'll find what I'm talking about. That's what I call masterpieces. Masterpieces of cable management, etc. Anyway, we're not creating anything like that here today. Just remember what I said about beautiful this side. Doesn't matter so much the other side. So we're going to push all these cables through here. And you push them through the hole closest to the power supply. If you can't fit them all through there, go for the next one. But yeah, even a non-modular power supply like this with a whole bunch of cables, we are going to fit through all those cables through there. Now again, another grey area. You've got different cases with different cable management designs. There's so much variation out there. Okay, we've threaded all the power supply cables through to the back so that we can now hide them all behind the motherboard tray. The next thing you want to be doing is dealing with all the front panel cables, because these need to be plugged into the motherboard. So these all come from the front panel, which is up here. You can see all of these connections convert out into all of these cables, and if you want all of these plugged in, you're going to have to plug them into the motherboard, and you need to have this one plugged in, otherwise you can't start the computer. So the little ones, these little plugs here, are the power and reset button, hard drive LED, power LED, all of that. And they need to be plugged into, this is actually quite difficult. This is color coded. So yeah, everyone does it in all different ways. Asus has the easiest way in my opinion. They have a separate piece that you actually plug all the cables into first and then plug it in, and it tells you which cables to plug where. But you can see underneath, it's going to be difficult. You can see the writing just there. Okay, I'm just trying to hold the camera steady. So on the right hand side you can see power LED. So that map underneath there tells you what to plug where. Okay. Now that same writing is written on these plugs, which come from the front panel. Okay, so there we are, power LED, so we know to plug that in there. So you use that little map. In this case, we're using that little map to plug these in. If you've got a different situation that I haven't explained, that you don't understand, just consult your motherboard manual. So there's a plug up there. We need to run a cable up there. That's the 8-pin EPS or 12 volt ATX CPU power. We've got another one here, which is the 24-pin motherboard power. We've got another one there, or two, which is 6-pin PCI Express. Depending on your graphics card, it might be 6-pin or 8-pin. So look at the cables, figure out which one you need to go where, and that's how you start the thought pattern of, like, for your cable management. So we need to run one up there as well. Here's the 24-pin motherboard power cable. You know where that needs to go. So use the hole that's next to the 24-pin motherboard power connector. Okay, so say it's right there, push it through, and is that where it is, Matt?
Yeah.
Okay, so that gets plugged into the motherboard, and you know, all that length of cable is hidden. You can't see it from the beautiful side. But I think you get the idea. I'm going to do all this cable management now, and I'll give you a look once I've finished and do a bit more explaining then. Okay, we've completely finished the build now, and I'm just going to show you what we've done with the cable management. because yeah, that's really the last thing that you need to do to finish a build. And it's, you know, it's important to get it right, because if you don't get those cables out of the way, not only does it look ugly, but it blocks airflow, which heats up the components, reduces their life. You know, cables can get stuck in fans. They can even get melted on hot components. So I keep them all right away from all the PCBs of all the components. I keep them away from every single heat generating component. So basically, you don't want any cables resting on any PCB or any heat generating component. And you want them all tucked right back out of the way so that they don't block any airflow to the components, and so that they look half decent as well, because you don't want to build full of spaghetti cables everywhere. It looks horrible. So you can see we've also installed some fans. We've got a fan in the top, a fan on the back. They're both exhausting. So I'm just going to talk a bit about airflow now. We've got two fans in the front sucking our air in. Got one on the bottom sucking air in, and we've got two on the top and the back sucking air out, exhausting. So you want to think about convection. Cold air sinks, hot air rises. So always at the front, you know, the other thing is the front of the case is going to be pointed to an area where there's no dust or not much, whereas the back is probably going to be pointed to a wall. So, you know, the front is going to be pointed to somewhere where there's more airflow and less dust. So the front needs to suck in. The fans at the front are always lower. So cold air in at the bottom. The bottom's always going to suck in. There's, you know, the cold air in, and then gets hotter and then rises to the top and then sucks out. So there's a few reasons for it. There's convection, and there's also the fact, you know, that the back is pointed towards the wall and gets the most dust. Whereas, yeah, anyway, I've already explained that, and you've had a good look around. You've seen what we've done with the cable management. Just give you a look from the front of the build. You can see the optical drive there. So you can see that this case is fully soundproofed. It's got all that soundproofing material there. All the fans are dust filtered. You know, these are some things that you really need to think about when you're buying hardware. And I know I haven't had a buying hardware guide in this video. That's something, you know, I consider that as being a completely different subject. It should be covered in a different video. This is purely a PC build video. But yeah, you want to really have a good think about what you want to use your build for and pick your hardware wisely. I'm sorry, I've got shaky hands. Been doing this cable management for about an hour now, probably more. Takes a long time. It's not as good as I would have liked, but this case is actually quite difficult to do cable management in. The reason for that is you don't have much space down the back of the motherboard tray. There's not a whole lot. That's something else you want to consider when you're buying a case as a beginner. If you want your cable management to be good and to be not too challenging, you need a case with plenty of cable management space. So something more, well, 30 millimeters or more would be ideal behind the motherboard tray. This case only has probably 15 to 20 millimeters, so it's really quite tight, and because of that, you can't just bunch all the cables up and put them all together in a nice, neat little bundle. You've got to spread them all out. Keep it in mind. The purpose of cable management is, first of all, airflow and then aesthetics, and also getting them away from the heat generating components. So there you go. That's the build all finished. I hope you got some useful information from this video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like and favourite if you want to see more.